Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With all due respect to my colleague from Maryland, I would suggest he read John O. Calamar and Ibram Kendi, these self-avowed critical race theorists, because they have a definition that deviates from what my colleague laid before the committee. They hold the position that critical race theory is avowedly political, that it divorces from the objective, that viewing things as objectively right or objectively wrong is racist. I think presenting that to anyone who would potentially lead people in battle, as I know my colleague has, is wrong. And I don't think, to Mr. Courtney's point, that it's inappropriate for the House Armed Services Committee to reflect on the values that are being instilled in service members, or really in anyone that's putting the uniform on and fighting for our country. Critical race theory is a poison. It otherizes our fellow Americans. It is not what we need in our military, in our schools, in our lives, or anywhere in a great nation. And the reason we have to legislate around these things is because we've got two different answers from Milley and Austin. We were all here when, in response to my question, Secretary of Defense Austin said, we don't teach critical race theory. There is no critical race theory in our service academies. And then lo and behold, Mr. Waltz had the receipts. He held up the curriculum that feeds into this notion of division among the races, which is a critique of the civil rights movement. If you really read a lot of the critical race theory text, it is a rejection of the values of Martin Luther King. They say that integration was wrong, that integration shouldn't have happened. Critical race theory is a vile incarnation of ethno-nationalism in America. And I reject ethno-nationalism, whether it comes from white people, black people, brown people, any other type of people. This is a great nation when we hold hands with one another and when we reject critical race theory. I thought it was something that when Mr. Waltz reflected on the specific professor that was offering instruction at the United States Military Academy on whiteness, that a cross-reference of that professor's writings suggests that the modern-day Republican Party is a white supremacist party. Would it be appropriate to have Republican lecturers making that point about Democrats? I don't think so at all. So I think that we should not become the school board. I don't think we need to get into the finer points of curriculum. But when our academies are teaching service members to hate one another, when the military is doing that, we have an obligation to stand up for the fundamental values of our nation. I yield back.
Mr. Horsford.
A Democratic president took over, Andrew Johnson. First thing he did is went down and took away the guns of the blacks who were given this property throughout South Carolina, Florida, and Georgia. And then they came back and took away their property. The KKK, Democrats. Jim Crow, Democrats. And guess what? The KKK was actually eliminated in 1985 until Woodrow Wilson, Democrat president, decided to bring it back with Birth of the Nation that he showed in the White House. And a few years later, it was Democrats who burned Wall Street down, Democratic KKK. Slavery was and still is an evil. Whether it's 83 years of history in our nation, or the prior 3,000 years of history, or the presence today around the world. Reparation is divisive. It speaks to the fact that we are a hapless, hopeless race that never did anything but wait for white people to show up and help us. And it's a falsehood. It's demeaning my parents' generation, that one of the greatest generations in the history of our country. We have a history of millions of middle class and wealthy Black Americans throughout our 20th century who achieved their dreams. Instead of a theory, I'd like to share the reality of a race whose history of success in America has been stolen, and what we can do to repay that damage. I grew up in the Deep South, Tallahassee, in the 50s and 60s, where we believed in commanding respect, not begging or asking for it. We did that by meritocracy, by winning, not just in sports and entertainment, but in every discipline: math, science, exploration, innovation, farming, enterprise. We had a reputation, as the Asian community today has a reputation of winning, respect. That was the black community back in the 60s. We led our country in the growth of the middle class, led our country in men matriculating from college, led our country in men matriculating from college, men committed to marriage over 70%, and percentage of entrepreneurs over 40%. Now 40% equated to 50 to 60% of black Americans across our country, from New York to Tallahassee to Texas to California, part of the middle class. I grew up in that middle class in the 50s. And believe me, they were not sitting back waiting for white people to give them a break. They were making it. I remember Perkins Service Station, Speed Grocery Store, Baker's Pharmacy, FAMU Hospital, where only black doctors and nurses worked. We were taught about pride in our country, pride in our race. We were taught about Christus Addis, the first American martyr who died in the Revolutionary War, the Tuskegee Airmen, and over 100,000 black men who fought the wars against the godless ideology of Marxism and socialism and communism. Those same ideologies now thriving in our educational institutions. We were taught to recognize and appreciate progress. In 1973, entered the NFL, no black quarterbacks, middle linebackers, free safety, because those are white thinking positions. 40 years later, we're now electing a president of the United States as a black man, vice president of the United States, a black woman. And we say there's no progress. Only those who say there's no progress, those who do not want progress. The greatest gift that we had with President Obama was our American people saying, finally, we can close this chapter. Finally, we can move forward. And what have we done since? That has divided us even more with critical race theory being introduced around the same time. We have a community now that lives the American dream. Look around this room and see the middle class that we have developed and more. And yet we tell those who are striving to get where we are that they can't because white people won't let them. That, to me, is treacherous, it's traitors. For us to tell others who want the American dream that they can't achieve it because other people with a white skin won't let them do that. If you want to repay the black American community, give us back our history. It was Karl Marx who said, the first battleground is rewriting of history. And that's exactly what's been happening. You take away our history, you take away pride in our past, appreciation for our present, and a vision for our future. And that's what you're seeing in Chicago, Baltimore, Ferguson. Every place Democrats oversee a black community is misery. And we're gonna blame white people? How about an ideology? How about we take ownership, educate our young people again, give them jobs opportunities again, tell them that the way to get in this country is through free market. Allow them to take away the regulations, allow them to run their own businesses. Don't burn down their businesses every year because a white police shoots a black person. When you have black people, 93% of the thousands of black people being killed are by other black people. Crime is a true issue. And with that being said, we are not a hapless, hopeless race. We're just like everybody else. Give us a break and we'll make it happen. Stand back and you see how great our nation, our community truly is. Give us an opportunity. We'll get that done, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does Mr. Correa seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
You know, like we're just down the mall here, right? We have the Jefferson Memorial. I'm a proud graduate of the University of Virginia. We understand the importance of the founding principles of our nation. That's what we're here to reflect and to advance. We know that we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. But importantly, that we are created equal, right? That's the fundamental principle that we all adhere to. And I think back to growing up and learning and listening to Dr. Martin Luther King and being judged by the content of our character, not the color of our skin. When I think about Chief Justice Roberts in 2000, I think 5 or 6, the Supreme Court opinion talking about the sordid business it is of divvying us up by race. Well, we're divvying up our entire country by race and teaching our children that America is evil. It's happening right now. If there is one upside or bright spot to the last year of operating under the pandemic rules and a lot of the silliness that has caused so much destruction and killed jobs and sent our children, unable to go to school. It's that the veil has been lifted on a public education system that is corrupting the very ideal of being American. It is happening right now with federal tax dollars being taxed, borrowed, or printed recklessly with $6 trillion over the last year. That money is being funneled directly into public education institutions, K through graduate school, that are teaching our children that America is evil, divvying us up by race, teaching our children that they should be apologetic for their race. It's happening. This is real. Go look. You're the press. Go dive into this. Go look into schools. Ask them to see their curriculum. Dig into it. Be the press. That's your job, to go seek the truth wherever it may lead. One of the fundamental principles also in our founding. These things are true. In Evanston, Illinois, students listened to the book Not My Idea, a book about whiteness. And parents were asked to discuss the book with their children at home. The book states that whiteness is a bad deal, and always was, and that you can be white without signing on to whiteness. Your schools, ladies and gentlemen, Americans, your schools, your tax dollars, your $30 trillion of debt being borrowed to fund those schools. I was taken aback by the woman who approached the issue. I think it might have been in Georgia. I don't know, Marjorie. I mean, it was somewhere where she was aghast at what was going on in the schools and what was being taught. And to a lot of parents out there, I hope now that the veil's been lifted, you start asking the question, why am I allowing my child to be indoctrinated by an education establishment that wants to teach my child that my country is evil? We need to end it, and we need to end it now. And that's why we're here. And I appreciate Dan's leadership. Our friend Burgess Owens, who couldn't be here, he's at a funeral. I've also introduced legislation, and it's called the Combating Racist Teaching Act. And it will make sure that all of our federal dollars, that not $1 can be used to fund a K through graduate school education if they're teaching any of these theories, any of this critical race theory stuff, any of it. No federal dollars. And I think we ought to stand on that as Republicans, because we stand for equality. We stand for equal justice under law, as written on that building right across the street in the Supreme Court.
Later today, the Senate will vote on the nomination of Kieran Ahoja, President Biden's choice to serve as head of the Office of Personnel Management. This is the position responsible for making hiring, payroll, and training decisions that affect literally millions of federal employees. The President's nominee has made statements expressing sympathy for the discredited, ahistorical claims about our nation's origins that form the backbone of so-called critical race theory. One major organization of federal employees expressed its concern about the nominee's capacity for, quote, neutrality, fairness, and impartiality. I share those concerns, and I'll be voting against this nomination. Still, elsewhere in the Biden administration, efforts to subvert the basic understanding of our founding principles are already well underway. The Department of Education's latest proposed priorities run roughshod over existing history and civics programs established with bipartisan support in order to push critical race theory on public school students and keep pace with woke sensibilities. American students deserve a rock-solid civics education grounded in actual facts, not divisive propaganda that tells them they're little more than a product of their racial background. That's the basis of new legislation I was proud to help introduce this week. Schools that choose to trade in fact-based curricula for activist propaganda like the 1619 Project forfeit their right to receive federal education grant funding for those teachings. So, Mr. President, the current administration came to power on a promise to unify a divided nation. It will be judged closely and carefully on how that power is used.
The critical race theory, 1619, this is a project that is destroying our country. These are the things that we overcame in the civil rights era, and I'm so proud that we did. I'm thankful for my colleagues that are introducing strong legislation against the critical race theory. I ask everyone to join together, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, and I don't cares, to stand together against racism of all kinds, of every kind of racism, and stand against this kind of racism, the critical race theory. Thank you.
First generation American, that's meaningful. Listen, we prize immigration, the legal kind. We believe in the rule of law. That's what maintains order. I'm going to yield to the gentleman from North Carolina, the youngest member of Congress, but he's wise beyond his years. Mr. Cawthorn, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. If Americans like what Democrats did for Baltimore, then they'll love what Democrats will do for the planet. The Biden infrastructure bill and the stimulus bill before it show that Democrats are more interested in transforming our nation's definitions of words than they are our physical infrastructure of roads and bridges. We need to cut government waste, not create more. And now the left wants to drag the Green New Deal through America's back door without any regard for the wishes of millions of Americans. Make no mistake, this infrastructure proposal is a wolf in sheep's clothing. It is a socialist wish list disguised as a roads and bridges initiative. This is exactly what Democrats have been doing since the day I was sworn in. They know that America is in desperate need of infrastructure reform. And they know that Republicans and Americans nationwide would vote for a common sense infrastructure proposal. But have they proposed such an initiative? Absolutely not. They will pretend that this legislation deals with infrastructure, and then they will stand on the steps of their multi-million-dollar mansions and decry any votes against their Trojan horse of a bill. Americans are fed up. Why aren't we passing legislation that does what it claims to be doing? Why are my colleagues on the left so excited to pretend critical race theory is the same as critically needed roads? Let's dispense between this false equivalency. Let's build bridges, not just the physical, but actual bipartisan bridges here in Congress. Why aren't we working together on the pitifully few issues that we still happen to agree on these days? I'm wondering. My constituents are wondering. America is wondering. With that, I yield back.
You'll hear these people. They made it. It was a big deal in Virginia. These counties, parents were really upset, and then a lot of the media would be like, "Oh, it's not happening. It's not happening," and they would basically act like this is all just made up. Well, let me show you some of the things that have been done throughout our country just in the last couple years. The Arizona Department of Education created a quote equity toolkit, claiming that babies show the first sign of racism at 3 months old, and that white children become full racists, quote, strongly biased in favor of whiteness by age 5. Santa Clara County Office of Education denounced the United States as a, quote, parasitic system based on, quote, the invasion of, quote, white male settlers, and encouraged teachers to cash in on kids' inherent empathy in order to recruit them into political activism. And a Philadelphia elementary school forced fifth graders to celebrate black communism and simulated a black power rally to, quote, free Angela Davis from prison. And at that particular school, 87% of students fail to achieve basic literacy by graduation. And so this is something that you see all across the country, and we have a responsibility in Florida to say we're not going to do it. So we did do that. So it violates Florida standards to scapegoat someone based on their race, to say that they're inherently racist, to say that they're an oppressor or oppressed or any of that. And that's good and that's important. But we also have to realize that we got to do more to make sure that that actually carries the day in the classrooms and in our society. So today we are going to be introducing to the public, and we have legislators who are going to help us with this, a new piece of legislation for the upcoming legislative session called Stop Wrongs Against Our Kids and Employees Act, the Stop Woke Act. And it's something that and this will do a number of things that are very important. One, it will put into statute the Department of Education's prohibition on CRT in K through 12 schools. No taxpayer dollars should be used to teach our kids to hate our country or to hate each other. And that's important, and that's all well and good, but I think what we've seen recently is you can legislate things like Parents' Bill of Rights. You can have certain things, and sometimes the school districts don't always follow it. And so we are going to be including in this legislation giving parents a private right of action to be able to enforce the prohibition on CRT, and they get to recover attorney's fees when they prevail, which is very important. And yes, there will be a fortified ability for the State Department of Education to hold people accountable, but honestly, the parents know best what's going on, and they're in the best position to be able to do it. And here's the thing. A lot of times these people will fear lawsuits more than a fine from the State Department of Education, because when you do a lawsuit, you get discovery, and you're subject to that. And when they say they're not doing CRT, and then you have all this information showing that they are doing it, it really is an uncomfortable position for them. So I think that gives parents the ability to go in and ensure that our state standards are being followed, and I think it's something that needs to be done. We also need to understand that this has become a cottage industry, this CRT. There's people making huge amounts of money. They basically will get tens of thousands of dollars to go in and do a training, sometimes at schools, sometimes at businesses, you know, basically saying like, okay, pay me $50,000 so I can teach your employees how racist capitalism is, or something like that. And I'm just thinking to myself, well, you're certainly charging a king's ransom to do that. You don't complain about capitalism when you're lining your own pocket. It's just when other people are doing well. But the issue is you have these whole cottage industry of these consultants that will come and they'll go into a school district, or they'll go to a business, and they'll go to colleges and universities, and they bring a lot of this into those institutions, and they call it equity. Just understand, when you hear equity used, that is just an ability for people to smuggle in their ideology. Because we don't need to have these terms. We have society based on equality, where you're treated equally regardless of your upbringing, regardless of your race. You have the same rights and privileges as anybody else. Equity is used to put the thumb on the scale in favor of their ideology. And so that's where you get things like CRT and a whole host of other things. So our legislation will defund any money for K-12 or higher ed going to CRT consultants. We are also not going to allow the staff or employees or teachers in our education system to be subjected to to that type of training where they're forced to sit there and listen. And they have had this in different parts of the country. The San Diego Public Schools did a training where they accused white teachers of being colonizers on stolen land and told them, quote, "You are racist," and quote, "You are upholding racist ideas, structures, and policies." And they recommended that the teachers undergo, quote, "anti-racist therapy." So this is wrong when it's done to our kids, but it's also wrong to force employees to have to go through that. So you are not going to have that in any school in the state of Florida, which is good. But, you know, it's not just in schools, and I know that's been a big focus, and understandably so, because parents send their kids. I think most parents just want them to be educated on the basics. I don't think that they're interested in this indoctrination. I know I'm not, and I know most of you are not. And it's important. And it is wrong when you're trying to take a kid who's there to learn basics, and you're putting ideology and you're trying to indoctrinate. But this also goes beyond education, and it goes beyond just schooling. And it really has become something that is being utilized by corporate America to, I think, create hostile work environments for many of their employees. And you look at what some of these big companies have done in recent years. Bank of America has had training teaching that the United States is a system of, quote, white supremacy and encourages their employees to become woke at work. Verizon has taught employees that America is fundamentally racist, and they've even promoted defunding the police. And a Google employee program claims that America is, quote, a system of white supremacy and that all Americans are, quote, raised to be racist. And so that is some of the stuff that we're seeing. And, I think about it, if you're in a company and someone's telling, dirty jokes or doing this, that could be considered a hostile work environment. Well, how is it not a hostile work environment to be attacking people based on their race or telling them that they're privileged or that they're part of oppressive systems when all they're doing is showing up to work and trying to earn a living? So we believe that this corporate CRT, it's basically corporate sanctioned racism, and they're trying to shove it down these employees' throats. We believe that that violates the Florida civil rights laws, but to the extent it doesn't, we're going to make sure that the law does include this into these laws so that employees have an ability to protect themselves against this kind of, really, which is harassment.
I'm here today to talk about those things that unite us as Americans, and I'm here to talk about those things that divide us. For centuries, public service has been something that unites Americans, drawing us together. Citizens from all walks of life serve in our military. They serve in federal and state and local governments. They serve in police units and fire departments across our country. They serve as teachers and coaches, and we as a nation are better off for their service and for their sacrifice. Those who serve our nation do it not because they have to, but because they want to. They do it because they believe this nation is worth serving. They do it because they believe this nation is worth defending. They believe it is worth celebrating. And they are right to think all of those things. Service to this country is an act of selflessness that affirms our nation is a place worth believing in. But I'm concerned that the President administration and this President, President Joe Biden, do not share this point of view. I'm worried that President Biden is nominating for federal office individuals who do not share a view of America as a good and decent place, who do not believe that the history of this nation is worth celebrating, nominating instead people who believe that this is a country founded in racism and shot through with corruption. Many of these nominees are partisans of a viewpoint that goes by different names, but shares several features in common. A view that America is a systemically racist place and systemically unjust. A view of America as corrupt. A view of American society as one that needs to be deconstructed, that needs to be pulled apart, torn down, and then rebuilt in a fundamentally different way. Now, this broad ideology has become known in public as critical race theory, or sometimes just critical theory. And let me tell you, as someone who has taught in our nation's universities, someone who has seen our institutions of higher learning up close, I would say to those in the media and elsewhere who now deny that there is any such thing as critical theory, that critical theory is in fact very real. It is very influential, and it appears to have become the animating ideology of this administration, and that is cause for great concern. Critical theory is an ideology that says the United States is rotten to its core. The leaders of this movement think our society is defined by white supremacy. They think our leaders are complicit at best. They think that all Americans are either oppressors or oppressed. In our world-class military, these critics see a vehicle for discrimination. In our American flag, they see propaganda. In our family businesses, they see white supremacy. In our police officers, they see agents of racial oppression. These critics allow no room for merit, for experience, or for grace in our life together. They pit whiteness and blackness against each other in a manner that reduces every American, no matter their character or their creed, to their racial identity alone. One of these critics, Dr. Ibram Kendi, wrote this: "The only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination. The only remedy to present discrimination is future discrimination." That's right. That's what he said. Think about that for a moment. He's saying that he's opposed to equality under the law. He's opposing our merit-based system for federal employment. Dr. Kendi and his followers are in no uncertain terms advocating for state-sanctioned racism in the United States of America. Now, it's a free country. Dr. Kendi and these other authors can write their books and debate their views and put them out in public. It's absolutely their right to do so. They are welcome to do so, but what we cannot allow, what we must not allow, is our federal government to affirm and sanction and advocate this critical race theory. We cannot allow the United States of America, the greatest nation on earth, to legitimize a new era of racial engineering. In the past few years, critical race theory has gained new prominence in the giant corporations, in the media, in the military, even in our children's schools. We're seeing this across the country. We've seen too many of our children exposed to a curriculum like the 1619 Project and its derivatives that encourages division rather than unity, that rewrites our history in the service of an ideological agenda rather than in the service of truth. Young children set off to school with eyes full of hope and hearts full of pride in their country, only to be taught that white privilege defines the nation, that subjects like mathematics are inherently racist, that the Christian faith is oppressive. They're taught that the nuclear family perpetuates racism. Now imagine for a moment if you were taught the same. Imagine if you were taught that your dreams were unjust or unfair, that your family were oppressors, that you were at fault for the problems of our society today. These are just children. We should be nurturing their dreams. We should be nurturing their hopes. We should be giving them a great hope for the future of this great nation known as the United States of America, a hope for the future of the greatest nation in the history of the world, rather than teaching them to mistrust their classmates and to distrust their own history. It doesn't end there. Last year, we discovered that federal agencies and other organizations funded by taxpayers were holding workplace training sessions where federal employees were told that virtually all white people contribute to racism. That's a quote. Or where civil servants were required to say that they benefit from racism. Now, President Trump put an end to this divisive curriculum, and he was right to do so. Workplace diversity training should focus on bringing people together, not on driving them apart. But under this new administration, I fear that critical theory is making a comeback. In March, President Biden rescinded the former president's ban on this divisive curriculum, and now he's nominated Kiran Ahuja to be director of the Office of Personnel Management. That's a key position that runs human resources for the entire federal government and millions of its employees. And Ms. Ahuja's nomination is before the Senate today. I'm concerned that Ms. Ahuja is a disciple of radical critical theorists. She has frequently promoted Dr. Kendi. She called him a thought leader at her confirmation hearing back in April. And just last year, Ms. Ahuja wrote that we must free the nation from the daily trials of white supremacy. Those are her words. She appeared to endorse Dr. Kendi's claim that the election of President Trump in 2016 was an example of racist progress in this country. And she declared that we must do everything in our collective power to realize Dr. Kendi's vision for America. Mr. President, I'm concerned that as the federal government's HR director, Ms. Ahuja could use her platform to promote radical ideologies that seek to divide rather than unite the American people. She could bring critical race theory back into federal government training, into every level of federal personnel, stronger than ever. And I'm not alone in this concern. All of my Republican colleagues on the Homeland Security Committee opposed Ms. Ahuja in a vote back in April. 2 weeks ago, the Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association, they represent 100,000 federal police officers that protect and defend our nation every day. They announced that they were also concerned about Ms. Ahuja's nomination because of her advocacy of critical theory. I have to say, I agree with federal law enforcement. I agree with what they said in their letter. We should nominate candidates for public office that are committed to ideological neutrality, to fairness, and to impartiality under the law. Now, I want to be clear, Mr. President, I do not for a moment question Ms. Ahuja's sincerity or her integrity. And in fact, I thank her for her willingness to serve the nation. But I cannot agree with what appears to be her fundamental ideology. At the end of the day, this is not about politics or personalities. This is about ensuring that the federal government stands for unity, not division, harmony, not hate. As the Reverend Dr. King famously said, and he was right, we should judge our fellow citizens by the content of their character, not by the color of their skin. Mr. President, we need a strong nation with strong citizens who see each other as Americans, not as oppressors or oppressed. Now, I've heard a lot of criticism about my position here today. I've heard the corporate media and those on the left say that I misunderstand critical theory, or that it's not real, or that it's not a real problem. I've heard many say the United States is indeed built on oppression and remains a systemically racist place. All I can say, Mr. President, is that's not the America that I see, and that's not the America that I know. The working people of this country, who have rallied to this nation's flag in every hour of danger, who are the first to help a neighbor in need, who coach our little leagues and volunteer at our churches, who go to work day in and day out to provide for their families and protect the place they call home. These are not oppressors, Mr. President. These are liberators. These are not oppressors, Mr. President. These are great people. They live with a spirit of liberty that has made this country the greatest country in the history of the world, and they want to see that liberty extended to every member of the American family. That's who the American people are. That's what makes them great. That's what they believe. And because they are a great people, Mr. President, our future is a cause for hope and not despair. The advocates of critical theory tell us we have to dismantle our culture, our history, our families, our Jewish and Christian heritage and beliefs because they're all oppressive. They say the future of this nation will be defined by racial division and racial strife. Mr. President, I reject that prophecy of our future, and I take my stand on the goodness of the American people and the God who guides us. I take my stand on hope. Mr. President, it is not oppression that defines the American story. It is hope. From the Minutemen at Lexington and Concord, to the pioneers who found a new life in the West, to the heroes of the Underground Railroad, to the Union soldiers at Little Round Top, to the workers who fought the old monopolies for fair pay, to the women who won suffrage, to the young men who twice liberated Europe, to the civil rights demonstrators who faced down the likes of Bull Connor, to the firemen and police officers who rebuilt New York and gave this country confidence again in the years after 9/11. It is love for one another and love for our country that we call home that has defined our story and given us hope. And that love and that hope will define our future once again. I am confident of it. In this nation, we're not united by ethnic creed or race or religion, and proudly so. We are united by our shared history. We're united by what we love together. We're united by the radical belief that those who liberate others, those who practice grace and mercy, those who call forth the best in those around them, they're the ones who change the world. And that principle, that truth, that hope is what drives our history. And we are not done building that history yet. The greatest nation in the history of the world is not done yet. Critical theory, in all of its guises, distorts our history, it destroys our common loves, and it would leave us hopelessly divided, at enmity with one another, and alone. To this dark vision, we must say no. To radical hope, we must say yes. For these reasons, Mr. President, I urge my colleagues to vote no on Mr. Houja's nomination, and I yield the floor.